Welcome to the Motherhood Alliance podcast, the podcast dedicated to empowering moms and families on their health and wellness journey. I'm Brittany Suttner.
And I'm Andrea Rankus. Together, we're here to explore holistic approaches that go beyond conventional medicine.
Each week, we dive into topics that matter most to you, everything from nutrition and mental health to alternative therapies and natural living.
We'll bring you the expert interviews, insightful discussions, and practical tips to make motherhood a little easier and help your family thrive.
Please keep in mind that this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to replace the advice, diagnosis, or treatment plans you have with your personal healthcare team. Please have a conversation with your trusted healthcare provider prior to making any changes or implementing any strategies or advice you learn from this podcast.
Whether you're a new mom navigating the early stages of parenthood or a seasoned pro looking for new ways to support your family's well-being, you're in the right place.
Here at the Motherhood Alliance podcast, we challenge the status quo, ask the tough questions, and offer a supportive community for moms who want to make an informed, holistic choice.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Let's get started. Hi, we are Britt and Drea from motherhoodalliance.com, and we are excited to welcome you to a 4-episode series with two of the amazing ladies from Alba Birth Center. Katie is a licensed professional midwife who joined Alba in 2016 and has attended over 350 births. She is a skilled educator who brings a wealth of wisdom and is incredible at breaking down complicated topics so her clients can feel supported and informed, and you'll hear that in these episodes. She is a strong advocate for environments that support physiological birth, and Katie loves coffee and has 2 young kids who were born in an out-of-hospital setting under midwifery care. Aubrey is the CEO of Alba, and she oversees the day-to-day operations and communications. She is a huge advocate for birth choice and is passionate about providing top-notch care for families in Northeast Wisconsin. And Audrey also brings a unique perspective to our conversations, as she personally has experienced the difference in birth settings as a mom who has given birth in both a hospital setting and at Alba Birth Center. This 4-part series with Katie and Aubrey includes some really fun topics, including the history of midwifery and current birth choices, the ancestral wisdom of birth, super cool, the cascade of interventions, what it is and how to advocate for yourself, and tips for partners during birth. Be sure to listen to all of them. All right, it's time to dive into today's episode's conversation. Hey everybody, welcome back. We're here with Katie and Aubrey again, and today we're going to be talking about the cascade of intervention. So the term cascade of intervention is commonly heard, but perhaps not commonly understood. So Katie, I'm going to start with you. What is the definition, and can you walk us through, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so cascade of interventions, or the intervention snowball, whatever you want to call it, you can get fancy with it, is basically from start to finish one intervention that starts within the birthing space, and it leads to the next, to the next, to the next, and all of a sudden you end up with a giant snowball of intervention, meaning you've had all of them, right? Half or all or whatever. When it comes to birth, and you're looking around the room being like, I do not know how we ended up here. Like, I came into this birthing space and I had this plan, and now somehow I'm on an operating room table, right? And often that is a lot of people's takeaway when they end up in a C-section. They were not planning a C-section. No one really wants a C-section. A very dramatic form of the cascade of intervention is it starts with one thing and you end up in C-section, or it starts at a home birth and you end up in a hospital, right? So it's basically just the stepping stones of, if one intervention is introduced, what's going to happen next, and almost always there's another. And so that is the definition of cascade intervention, or intervention snowball. And this is a tricky one. This is a really tricky conversation, because a lot of times things happen to women in the birthing space that they are not aware of until after. And then they always look back and they'll be like, what the heck happened? Like, how on earth? That's not what I wanted. And it's really tricky for a lot of women to process through this, because then society slaps you in the face with healthy mom, healthy baby. You're good.
Gosh.
Don't talk about, why are you even mad? Like, you have a healthy baby. Your baby didn't die.
You're fine.
You're fine. Right? Like, it wasn't that bad. And again, if you listen to episode 2, when we talked about ancestral birthing, this is the longing for something, but you're not sure what. The cascade of interventions is a beautiful robber of that. It is swift, and it is, oh my gosh, you just, like, you blink and all of a sudden you have 20 interventions that are being done to you or that are being suggested for you. And in a moment of labor, which I could talk about the biology and the physiology of a mom's brain in labor for hours when we'll get there.
Maybe we'll do that in another episode.
Yes. But essentially what happens is, to have a baby, you have to surrender over to your hindbrain, which is your survival brain, and you turn off your frontal cortex, which is your decision-making brain. That has to happen in order to surrender over to the birthing experience and to have the hormones to have a baby. And so if you look at a mother who is having intense labor and you ask her to make a decision about something big, it will always have to be fear driven from the mom's perspective, because you're asking her to turn back on this part of her brain in her front. And she looks at you like, a lot of times we hear like, I don't know. And you're like, well, this is a simple question. And they're like, I don't really even know what you're asking me. It's not that she has no idea what's going on. She's having a baby. And so the cascade of interventions, like I said, is a beautiful robber of a physiological birth, because it just moves in. It is like wildfire, and it just moves in and it robs people of their longing to have the birth they wanted to have, even if they weren't able to, particularly define that for themselves. And it grows, and it grows quickly.
Is there a common way that it typically starts?
So I have my thoughts on this. I have my thoughts on what is ground zero, if you will. The first intervention that I think a lot of women do not understand can lead to more intervention, is actually prenatal cervical exams. So no one really thinks about this part. A lot of providers have the need and feel the need to check cervixes, which I don't really understand that part, because cervixes are not magic 8 balls. They do not tell you anything about what's to come. You could be absolutely closed and have your baby 2 hours later, or you could be walking around at 6 and have your baby in 3 weeks. So the cervical exam thing in our maternal health care really confuses me. I think it can be a helpful piece of information to put your puzzle together, right? So if you have a labor that's been doing its thing, maybe we're stalling out, we're not sure what's going on, mom's feeling confused, we're feeling like we're spinning wheels, it can be a wonderful tool to call upon to be like, okay, well, actually, you're only 2 centimeters dilated. And so why don't you go home and sleep, right? Rather than walking for the next 24 hours. It's a piece of information. It's not the end all be all. So I think a lot of times women in especially our mainstream maternal health care with their OB providers, think that this is something that is needed and normal and necessary to check a cervix. And so a lot of times providers will start at 36, 37 weeks with a cervical exam. And when you check a cervix, it warrants an answer, right? I'm getting a little into the weeds on this, but I'll make my point. When you check a cervix, and with any intervention, you are asking for some sort of information. So if I check a cervix and your cervix is closed, as it should be at 36 weeks, and I say, okay, you're 36 weeks, your cervix is closed. No biggie, we'll check you next time. You come in for your 37-week appointment, it's still closed, as it should be. And then your provider is looking at you like, well, not much change. Well, was there supposed to be change?
Yeah, right. I'm worried now. Why are you telling me this?
And now immediately you have fear and doubt in your body. And it changes your entire trajectory of how you labor this baby, because you think your body is faulty when no. And if you just didn't even have this information, how much more powerful would it be to just all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm having a baby. My cervix must be gone, as it would be if you're having a baby. And so the protection of your body during pregnancy and at your prenatal care is so important, because you also have to ask your brain, what am I going to do with this information? Because we have some moms come in and ask for a cervical exam at 39, 40 weeks. And immediately I say, what is this going to do for your brain?
Like why?
Tell me why you want to know what your cervix is doing. Is it going to make a difference? And some moms are like, whatever, I don't care about my cervix, And some moms are like, I just need to know if there's change. Well, why? Why do you need to know if there's change? You haven't had contractions. Why would we expect there to be change? Right? And so I think that protecting the first drop of doubt and fear is what's going to help you avoid at least the cascade of intervention. Now, some women just don't even know that that's the beginning, right? It seems so benign. You're just checking your cervix. Convenient. Mm-hmm. So I think understanding what are interventions in the birth space and what can come of them, and also knowing that there is not one intervention that holds no weight. All interventions do, even listening to the baby. If we listen to the baby, we're counting. If the baby isn't in the right space, right, the heartbeat, well, that warrants another intervention. So even checking your baby's heart tones, that seems great, and people want that. And yes, so do we. We check heart tones for a reason. But it's not that it's without risk, if you will. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. Even just those simple little things that you wouldn't think twice about. I could see how that would instill thoughts into your head that may or may not be
and then
good.
you're looking around the room like, well, should it be doing something? Should I be changed?
Yeah.
Should I? And then if no one is there to be like, no one needs to tell you how to have this baby. You have it in you. Like, you're good. You're good. You're good. You don't need to fear this.
I bet that some moms that come to you and say, hey, do I need a cervical check or
People
whatever?
are so shocked.
And you're like, why? And you're like, you don't need it?
Yes, it's that conversation. Yeah. I mean, we have many moms come through and they have their babies without even a cervical exam.
Yeah.
And also a lost practice. Sit in the presence of a laboring mom. You'll know when she needs to push.
Yeah,
You'll know.
I know.
You don't need to check a cervix to be like, you're 10, go ahead. No, that's actually not needed. It's a tool you can call upon, as most interventions are, but for the most part, they're not needed. And then it just spirals from there.
Can you list off, like, okay, so those are some really great, quote unquote interventions that I wouldn't have necessarily thought about. So can you kind of rattle off a list of a cascade? Give us like a cascade example of maybe something you've experienced or that's typical. Yeah.
In an out-of-hospital setting or in a hospital setting?
Let's go with both.
Okay.
Let's start with in hospital. Like, what's kind of typical? And then I do want to ask a couple questions about like Alba and midwives specifically. Now, obviously, sometimes things can go in a direction that you're not expecting. So let's start with hospital.
And I will also just say this before I dive in to that topic. No one is like immune to this, right? Like, this is not just a hospital thing. You can have a midwife that is really keen on intervention and the same ending will happen. It might be a little gentler, right? It might look a little prettier, but you could end up in the same position. So just to know, it's not just like hospital versus out of hospital, OB versus midwife. That's not really how this works. And almost always the OBs actually aren't present for most of these interventions.
Yeah, that's true.
This is a lot of the nurses and the policies and the timeline you're put on when you go into the hospital space. So a very typical hospital experience that we hear of, I hear this probably, 4 times a day. A very typical hospital birth in America would be you have your regular prenatal care. They're short, they're sweet, they're to the point. There's nothing really fluffy about these prenatal visits. Around 36, 37 weeks, typically cervical exams start and ultrasounds at the end for growth scans. I put air quotes around that. Growth scans happen. Those growth scans at the end can be off by a pound or two. And so another, what seems like a helpful intervention that can lead to, your baby's looking really big, or, your baby's looking really small. So if a provider's standing in front of you and says, your baby looks giant, immediately you're like, oh my gosh, I'm terrified of that. Instead of being like, your baby is made to fit through your pelvis. End of sentence. That's it. You made your baby will come through. And so again, fear, right? Checking the cervix is closed. Baby's looking big on the ultrasound. Well, why are we doing ultrasounds? Use your hands, right? Use your hands, another dying practice. Mom talks about, well, I'm not really having any signs of labor around 39, 40 weeks. And so we schedule an induction around 40 weeks. Again, hospital policy. This is not really an OB that's like, I'm out to get you all. This is hospital policy. We don't allow people to go past 40 weeks. And if you look into the history of gestation, it's typically most first-time moms will go into labor on their own 41 and a half weeks gestation. 42 weeks is actually post-dates, right? Not after 40 weeks. And so also, are we taking into consideration the mother's cycle length, when they ovulated? When was conception? Did they ovulate twice that month, right? This is all stuff we dive into in our first visit with our moms to really understand, like, what is a guess date? What month do we think you're going to have your baby in? Not really date, it's like a month. And so to not fear going after your due date. And so a typical induction happens around 39 or 40 weeks. If you're having a due date around the holidays, good luck, because they almost always will schedule inductions before the holidays or right after, because they want to be with their families. And again, I feel like I'm not trying to dog the OBs. This is just how it goes typically. And then you go in for your induction. Typically they start an induction early morning or late night. So it'll be, you'll either go in at midnight or you'll go in at like 4 a.m. They typically will start with, an induction starts with medication almost from the jump. And so I know in a different episode, Aubrey talked about Pitocin. Pitocin is one of the most widely used medications here in America. And inductions are one of the most widely planned medical intervention there is. And Pitocin is tricky because Pitocin is oxytocin, which is what makes our uteruses contract. The tricky part about synthetic oxytocin, Pitocin, through your IV, is it cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So your body's in labor, but your brain is not, which is why Aubrey was talking about how a labor with Pitocin and no epidural is a knockout. I mean, it is not. You're blind. You are seeing black, right? It is so tricky. And then, of course, someone walks in your room and you're like, this has to be a joke. I'm only 3 centimeters dilated. I'm having knockout contractions back to back. A nurse walks in and says, you want an epidural? Immediately, yes, of course. Are you kidding me? I cannot do 7 more centimeters of this. Yep, sign me up, even though that's not what you wanted. But again, remember, a laboring mother, their brains are different. And so it's a whole different species that
So
is in front of
interesting.
you.
I totally get that too. I
Yes,
know that.
It is
I
tricky. Did
know
you
it.
have a Pitocin
I
labor?
didn't know, but I know what you're talking about, the brain, because you cannot
yes.
think.
No,
You can't. You're just doing your thing.
Well, and you're in the space you should be.
You should be. Absolutely.
Right. You're being a primal being.
Absolutely.
Right. We just don't welcome that in our society because it's weird. You're
Yeah.
like, why are you not giving informed consent? And you're like, I'm having a baby. Leave me alone. So almost always then an epidural happens or an epidural happens and then you continue your induction. And with Pitocin, you get slamming hard contractions because they up it about every 30 to 40 minutes. And so what I always tell people with Pitocin, picture a cup inside of you, and every mom is a little bit different in size cup they have. Pitocin sprinkles into there and eventually it will spill over. And so some moms can get like 4 doses of Pitocin or 4 ups of Pitocin and really not feel many contractions. And then all of a sudden it just hits them. And it's like this cup overflows. They've hit their limit. And now all of a sudden they have back-to-back contractions, which is not physiological for early labor. And then you start to see a baby who starts to decel. What's happening to them is they're being slammed into a cervix that is not ripe or dilating, or even being told to do anything because the brain is not working because it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So you have a uterus that's contracting, slamming a baby into a wall, basically. And then they start to get annoyed by that. And then we're like, ooh, well, yeah, this baby's not loving this anymore. Position change. Ooh, this baby's not loving that anymore. Position change. Ooh, this baby's not loving that anymore. Position change. If this happens for 1 more hour, we're going to have to get the baby out. Then we go back to C-section. You have a baby via C-section, which happens about a third of the time here in America. There's hospitals down south that are at 60% C-section rate. There's one hospital last year that was at 82% C-section rate. It's terrifying. And then you get back to your room and you have your baby in your arm and you look around the room like, what the heck just happened? And then you have someone come in and be like, thank God you were here. Oof, emergency C-section. Emergency C-section. What if we didn't start with any of those things that happened prior, right? So that's a very dramatic version.
Yeah,
but it's also a very common story.
I hear that too.
It's a very common story, though it sounds so dramatic coming out of my mouth. I was surprised.
No, I think a lot of listeners will be like, you just told me what I just went or what I went through.
Or
and maybe it doesn't end up in C-section, but it does end up in a very scary experience because of the way that we intervened from the jump. Now, this doesn't always not happen in a birth center or a home birth either. What's nice, though, is most midwives adopt a more informative educational approach to their prenatal care. And so the women should know what the interventions are. I teach about this in class. We talk about hospital interventions at my out-of-hospital birth class because we have a transfer rate. Almost all midwives end up transferring some amount of clientele into the hospital system. And so I always say, I never want to feed anyone to the wolves, right? Especially if you're coming from an out-of-hospital birth. And you enter into that space, it's going to be terrifying, right? It's going to be terrifying. It is not the plan. No one wants to be there. No one wants us there, right? This is just not how this was planned. And so then, of course, knowing what interventions are coming. So always do like a little crash course on the way there. Remember, these are the things that you wanted, right? Have a birth plan written up, though I don't really like birth plans, but that's a whole nother conversation topic. And just knowing too, and even in an out-of-hospital setting, if you have a provider that's pushing for certain things that don't feel right in your gut, you have to say no. Like you absolutely just immediately have to say like, I don't really love that idea.
Or even just if you're feeling that fear, like you just have that gut reaction of something's not right, but you can also be like, I'm feeling fear now and I don't like it.
Yes.
So,
and where did that come from?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So can we circle back to, you just briefly touched on it, but within the birth center or even a home birth, transfers do happen. So
they do.
Tell us a little bit about what would someone expect or what are some common reasons that you would have to transfer?
It's really nice to see physiological low risk birth so often because when it doesn't do that, you can see it. And there is almost hardly ever, does that make any sense? A birth emergency. Though we are trained to think like it goes from 0 to 100 because in the hospital setting, a lot of times we do see that we're fine, tank, and then C-section or whatever ends up being the remedy for it. In the birthing world in an out-of-hospital setting, remember, we're not dealing with high-risk moms. We can't, and we won't, and we shouldn't. That is not a safe space for them or the babies. And so we do the same level of prenatal testing. We do the same level of screening ahead of time. We make sure our moms and babies are healthy going into labor. Their blood work looks good. They don't have a history of X, Y, or Z. The baby has normal anatomy. We're not just like willy-nilly out there, dancing in the back, waiting for any old baby to come through, right? So when a mom goes into labor, one, just letting that happen spontaneously and naturally is always the safest. So, right from the jump, you don't have anything that's really like pushing us in a direction of unsafety. And so when a mom is laboring with us and we start to see something that we don't love, this is how I will always say it at birth. Like, I am here, and also the whole room can hear and see as well. So it's not like just me. I'm not like standing out in the hallway having my own thoughts and then coming in and being like, we need to go. And they're like, what? That's not what I thought was going to happen. It's a really nice experience to hear and see something that isn't normal, right? Isn't physiological. It's not low risk anymore. And that could be something from maybe a mom has a really malpositioned baby and it's a first time mom. It's the hardest babies to come through. It's a first time mom with a malpositioned baby or their sunny side up. And we've been laboring for X amount of hours, a day and a half, 2 days. And mom was a puker during labor. And so her vitals start to tell us that she is not loving this anymore. Her heart rate starts to go up. Her immune system kicks in because it's on fight or flight. So we start to see a low grade fever. Blood pressure starts to get low. We're like, okay, what's going on? She's starting to fall asleep, standing up, right? These are all signs that this is not the safest space anymore. So everyone thinks it's always like, hit the blue button on the wall. Everyone's dying. Get the ambulance here. Our transfers are hardly ever like that. It's a slow progression. Or let's say heart tones are weird, right? We hear a baby that has heart tones that are not good. And there's clear parameters around what is good and what is not good. And you have to have a skilled provider who's trained in tracing heart tones to know what is good, what is not good. And also calling upon the mother. If the mother is saying something is off, this is not for me anymore, that's also a reason to transfer. Many people don't talk about that part. There are some moms that hit a point where they're like, this is not for me anymore. Something is off. I don't love this anymore. I think that we maybe need to go in for some extra help. So usually what that looks like is a midwife will call ahead to the doctor of their choice or the hospital of their choice, and we make a very smooth transition there. There have been some transitions that are needing to happen quicker than others. Sometimes postpartum, a baby comes through and is just not like being born, right? And they need a little extra help. And so that does happen as well. And so it's usually a midwife will go with them and we transfer into the hospital with the client, whether that's in a car right behind the ambulance or in the ambulance or whatever that situation is needing from the provider. We go in, we have already called ahead, we've already faxed records, we go up. In the valley here, we have a nice working relationship with the hospitals. I think it's pretty well known that hospital providers don't really agree with out-of-hospital birthing, in just because they are trained high-risk deliveries. They see the worst of the worst. Yeah. And so, of course, their brain isn't going to be like, that's super safe, you should do that. And then there are some really great OBs who are like, everything in front of me is low risk. I do not see why you shouldn't have an out-of-hospital birth or why you couldn't. Maybe I should say it that way. So we get in there and then, of course, whatever the situation is, then it will warrant whatever comes next. So usually it's a pretty steep cascade of interventions if we move into that space, unless we have a mom who is like, no, you're not doing that. I'm not doing this. A lot of the hospitals around here are wonderful. The nurses are great. I mean, OB nurses are wonderful. They get it. They're with the times. They're not like, oh, they don't want this, and this. They're the weird people. They're just like, that sounds great. Let's get you what you need.
Well, so. they especially if they've seen you multiple times sure. and they know you. And I think the clients also are probably like, they trust you through the process. Sure. They're there. I know when I went through a birth center, I was like, I trust the midwife more than I would, honestly, for me, trust the hospital OBs, right? And so I was like, if she's telling me that there's needing to be something going on here, I need to go to the hospital, I will trust that sure. and I will feel peace with that.
And you also will feel that in your own self.
Absolutely.
You'll be like, you're right, this isn't normal anymore. Yeah. It was fine and now I feel the shift. Like we don't give ourselves enough credit for that either, of knowing when something is going right or wrong, because we've been told to listen to them.
Right, exactly. Right. But then you can feel like, I'm going to have peace about this later.
Yes. Yep.
What is for birth center or home births in general, and maybe you don't have the stat off the top of your head, but what is the transfer rate? Just out of curiosity.
Ours sits around, like, we kind of fluctuate each year between like 9 and 11% transfer rate. And I would say majority of those are first-time moms with a malpositioned baby. Those are the majority of our transfers. And then I think our C-section rate was sitting at like 3 or 4% or 4-ish percent. So of the 10% that transfer, a small percentage will have a C-section. And, I mentioned the C-section rate in America is about 32%.
So when you go there with them, do you take on more like a doula role?
Exactly. We take off our midwife hat, even though just tucked
You're
in our
still
back
there.
pocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we put on our doula hat. Of course, we don't have privileges in the hospital. And so we also need to understand and respect the space that we're walking into and respect the expertise that is coming. Because if we need to get this baby out, well, we need to get the baby out. And those are moments we can be grateful. I have seen, actually last year, I had one of the most empowering births that I have ever attended, and she ended up in a C-section. And she will rave about her birth because every step of the way, it was her decision.
Oh,
It was the most empowering birth I've ever been to. She pushed for more hours than I even care to admit on this podcast, because she wanted to. She's like, absolutely not. The baby sounds good. We're going to keep going. I will get this baby out. And we got to a point where we were in the hospital now at this point. We got to the point where it just wasn't happening. It wasn't safe. The baby was so malpositioned and giant. And it wasn't a fit issue. It was a position issue. And she had the most empowering birth that I have ever witnessed from a first-time mom. And she ended up in C-section. So everyone thinks we're like so anti C-section and anti OB and anti whatever. Midwives are not. We just respect birth the way it should be respected, and then call upon those people and those expertise.
well, and thank God for those needs, like for
Thank
the
God.
surgery when we need it.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that this episode blended beautifully in with the ancestral wisdom one,
Yes.
where, if we just go back to the natural way that birth used to be, this
Yes.
cascade of interventions, they're not needed unless things are taking corners,
And I think knowing that you can just say no, like you don't have to do
you have
what they're
options.
recommending.
Yes.
And even for me, like if I make a recommendation, you just say, no, that doesn't fit with me right now. Like I don't want to. Or
And ask questions,
Mhm.
right? Like, well, I don't like that, but what is my other option here?
a good question to ask in birth is, if we don't do this, what happens? Right? So if they're like, we need to check your cervix. Well, if we don't, then what?
You'd probably shock them. Like,
Yes.
what?
Yeah.
You're
'cause they'd
saying
be like,
no?
I don't know. We can't admit you then. And you're like, why not? I'm in labor.
Yeah, just keep
Right?
asking why.
Just, yes.
over and
'cause-
over and over.
And really, I think that that's important for any provider that's in front of you. If you hold their feet to the fire, they better be able to handle it. Because what are they good for then? If they cannot own the decisions that they're making, this is how bad outcomes happen for people who are not held accountable, right? So we hear so much birth trauma. I heard a story of, I probably shouldn't go into it, but I heard a really, really, really horrible C-section story the other day, and I just couldn't even believe it. And I asked that person, so what did your OB say when that happened? And she was like, oh, I never saw her again. I was like, what do you mean you never saw her again? She's like, yeah, she wouldn't come in my room. And I was like, okay. So the disassociation around the trauma that happens with birth, and I will go as far as to say abuse, and this can happen from any provider that's in front of you. So not just OBs, not just nurses, not just midwives. There can be abuse that happens in the guise of healthcare and the guise of safety. We need to do this so your baby doesn't die. Well, no, you're not going to do that unless I say that's okay, right? And a lot of women, right, we're people pleasers to a fault. We suck at this. When someone's in front of you and says, well, your baby could die if this happened.
Well, and
Who
also
is going to say
your
no?
well, and your brain's not working
Exactly.
again.
Right. So to have that level of protection, one around what do you even admit yourself to? What do you even subject yourself to from the jump? And then furthermore, how do you protect it when you're in the midst of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think this conversation, it's a hard conversation, honestly, but it's really, really needed because people just need to know that they have choice. One thing I want to mention that you guys offer is you have a childbirth education class that is like 5 stars. So I think if people want more information or just want to talk through this more, that would be a really good place for them to attend.
Yes, I teach the classes. I've taught the classes since 2017. So I have taught this class for many, many years. And it used to be very small and quaint. We used to sit in a circle, which I thought was so cute. Like we used to all sit in a circle in our chairs and we'd go around and say each other's names and like what we were, whatever. So it has really grown. I have loved watching it grow. Last year I had my first class. It was like 54 people, like
Your guys
26.
are going to need to build like a.
You need to rent out a
You
space.
need to rent a space.
I remember walking downstairs. I had like finished on my clinic day and I walked downstairs and I don't know if I didn't have access to the RSVP list because that's her department, Aubrey's department. I walked downstairs and the entire room is packed. There's people sitting in the bathroom. Okay. Like there were people sitting in the bath. I walked down and someone called me professor and I nearly choked and died. I believe it or not, I actually don't love public speaking. It makes me so nervous. Anyways. It's been so fun to really kind of shift and change this class through the years. It used to be 4 classes. Now it's 3. We used to show the business of being born. Now we can't find it anywhere. So we don't do that anymore. I have every single class that I teach is different, and the level of involvement from the class is really what like makes me go, like makes me so happy when people ask the hard questions and they want to hear the nitty gritty of birth and they want to know what are we walking into, because it's a big deal. So childbirth ed classes, we do them 4 times a year, one each season, and then intermittently I'll throw in like a Saturday morning virtual one. And that just kind of is based on availability and stuff like that. So we put some information out about that. But it is for hospital birthers, out of hospital birthers. It's for moms and dads to be taken together. I have an entire section on partner support. And so we might be talking about that in a future episode as well, of what I really have found over the years. What I've even asked my own husband, I'm like, dude, help me understand your brain. Like, I don't understand men, period. And then also in the birthing space, like what on earth goes through your brain? And so talking about that and empowering men to be part of the experience and not just on the sideline. And you are more than just holding a leg, because that's garbage. You contributed to the making of this child. So you better contribute to the coming out of the child. And also, we do not honor dads, right? We do not honor dads in our society, and we push them aside. And they also have birth trauma. I mean, I could keep going. Sorry. I'm getting into it now.
Yeah.
But really just involving the families. Childbirth ed classes, they're really good. It's a 3-week course. Each week is different. So we go from conception through 6 weeks postpartum and lactation and breastfeeding.
Perfect. I love that. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. So thank you, ladies, for joining us again.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving a rating or review or sharing it directly with a friend who could benefit from the information? We know that you're a busy mom or caregiver, and our goal is to make your life easier by bringing tips and tricks directly from experts into your earbuds. By sharing this episode with someone you love, you can play a critical role in helping to make their life easier as well. We appreciate your time, and thank you for being a part of the Motherhood Alliance family.